Good afternoon, I'm DK Roster. This is TTT Live. At this time, we are carrying you to the Minister of National Security, Stuart Young, who is about to hold a press conference providing an update on national security issues. We do this bringing you live coverage on TTT, Talk City 91.1 FM, and TTT Live Online. Let's join that press conference now.
Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you all very much, as usual, for your attendance here today at fairly short notice. I have asked you all here today to discuss really one major issue that is affecting the national security of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's an area of serious concern for me as the Minister of National Security, and also for us at the National Security Council, that I've been seeing unfold. And over the last 72 hours, I've had a first-hand exposure to certain aspects of it that I did not have direct exposure to before. And coming out of that and having discussions with certain lawyers in the state, as well as certain lawyers retained by the state, I think it is appropriate that as a Minister of National Security, I come and address this situation to send some very strong signals, messages, and to just really lay down certain pillars and markers as we go forward. The first thing I'd like to do is just remind everybody that we continue to be in the middle of a very serious global pandemic. COVID-19 is affecting the world globally. It is not only affecting Trinidad and Tobago and countries near to Trinidad and Tobago. It is global. In fact, if you look at international news and you see what's happening in the Western Hemisphere and in the United States as an example, I was just looking at it, over 12.5 million cases, positive cases of COVID. Over the past couple of weeks, every day is over 100,000 new cases of COVID. Deaths are rising. We must take note and take stock of that in Trinidad and Tobago, not take it for granted, the effects of COVID-19 and how it could negatively affect us here in Trinidad and Tobago. The second thing I'd like to point out, and to remind everyone, and there is no parameter or barrier on the everyone, the borders of Trinidad and Tobago are closed. All right, the borders of Trinidad and Tobago have been closed since the 22nd of March of this year to both our nationals and to non-nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to repeat that. The borders of Trinidad and Tobago are closed since the 22nd of March of this year to our nationals. That is an issue we've been dealing with. I look around here and see certain members of the media. You all have been following it daily, religiously. You know that the borders are closed to our nationals and far less to non-nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. That is an important point, and it should not be forgotten. The borders are closed, and this is a law. This is the current law of Trinidad and Tobago. This government, since 2015, has operated based on the law of Trinidad and Tobago and our government policy. So again, law and government policy. And the applicable laws that I'm talking about here this afternoon are immigration laws, are health regulations, what have come to be known as, coming out of the Public Health Ordinance. I think we're on number 30-something now, of our COVID health regulations and our Trinidad and Tobago government policy. Our immigration law, the health regulations, the COVID regulations, and government policy. And persons must respect the law and abide by the law. It's not for anybody just to disregard the law. When you disregard the law, it could lead to anarchy. The government formulates policy, it goes to Parliament, is legislated, either now or previously, and then it's an application and implementation of the law. It is not up to any one person. In a democracy, it doesn't operate like that. It's not up to lawyers, it's not up to courts, it's not up to anyone to just change the law according to how they feel. This government has always approached the issue of non-national migration with a balance that includes the humanitarian aspect. The government cannot be legitimately and justifiably accused of not treating with non-national migration issues, and even with our nationals, with the borders outside, without a humanitarian pillar. But that is only one of the pillars. Understanding that the world is currently in a COVID pandemic, a pandemic that is COVID-19, and what we're doing is seeking to protect our population, as we've done since January of this year. And part of the benefit of that is what we can all do. There is a serious degree of normalization in Trinidad and Tobago, to a large extent. You look at what is going on around the world, in all of the sophisticated countries in Europe, etc., they're rolling back, they're locking down. Because of how we've managed it, fortunately, we are not in a complete lockdown position in Trinidad and Tobago. But I want to remind, we're dealing with COVID and measures to protect the population against COVID. And our policy has always been to protect our citizens and those who are legally here in Trinidad and Tobago. Every sovereign country has the right to decide its own laws once those laws are not unreasonable and don't trample on persons' rights. And that is what the government has done. Right now, with respect, so the issue I'm dealing with here today is illegal migration and attempts to break the borders of Trinidad and Tobago by illegal immigrants. If we have closed borders and our nationals around the world are seeking, as they've been doing since March, exemptions and approvals from the Minister of National Security with the team at National Security and getting that, and we're now over 7,600 exemptions granted for persons to come in. Who decides that other persons can just break our borders, illegally enter our borders, and jeopardize us? And for what reason are they doing it? I understand the emotion. I understand the emotion and how persons who try to manipulate a narrative would focus on women and children. But we'll get to the issue of human trafficking. Because you see, at national security, you always have that little bit more knowledge, as you should, than what the general population may have. So what I want to say is the current law that applies to Venezuelans now in particular, being 7 miles off the coast of Trinidad, is as follows. You all would recall that in May of last year, around May of last year, we had a Venezuelan migrant registration process for 2 weeks. Despite all of the cries and the attempts to put a negative spin on it, it was a successful process of registration. That was a humanitarian move by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. You would recall that one of the things we declared is regardless of whether you're here in Trinidad and Tobago from Venezuela, legally or illegally, come forward and register. And what that registration would do is provide you with certain status, certain legal status in Trinidad and Tobago, and we would not concern as to whether you were here illegally. We gave that opportunity. Coming out of that 2-week process, we had 16,523 people legally registered. Your government, in the formulation of the policy, put down certain markers and made it very, very clear, abundantly clear at that time, to international bodies such as UNHCR and to others via you, the members of the media, and via the public policy that we put forward. At the time, we indicated clearly that those not registered at the end of that process would be deported in accordance with our laws. You see, we are a small island state. We have limited resources. We have our first responsibility to our citizens and those here legally. But we took the humanitarian approach. We did not know how many Venezuelans were in Trinidad and how many we would have to register. You all would recall 2 years before that, the figure of 40,000 was being bandied about. But we had a registration process even before things unfortunately started to deteriorate in Venezuela. And at the end of that process, it was 16,523, not the 40,000, which you would have expected to have climbed because of what was going on in Venezuela. That's an important point, because I see today certain bodies, international bodies outside of Trinidad and Tobago, bandying about the figure of 40,000 upwards. The registration process had 16,523. At the time we said, those who are not registered, you will be deported afterwards. Some other important markers were, if you break the law of Trinidad and Tobago, your registration status would be scrapped, it would be cancelled, it would be terminated, and you could be deported and you could be charged. This was not a get out of jail card. We also have now extended this facility. It was initially for a period of a year. It's now been extended to the end of this year on the 31st of December 2020. And as I've said just a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago, Cabinet will take another decision with respect to a further extension of those who have been registered. The government said at that cutoff point, this is what our resources can handle. This is our humanitarian gesture. These are brothers and sisters. We understand that they may have reasons for being in Trinidad and Tobago, but after that, it was a cutoff. We made that very, very clear. Immediately, the registration process stopped on a Friday. We did some run-over registration in Tobago on the Saturday. On Monday morning, immediately we announced the introduction of a visa system, a requirement for Venezuelans to have visas to enter Trinidad and Tobago. The same way we as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are required to have visas to enter certain countries. Canada, the United States are two that come to example, and we can't enter their countries without visas legally. The same way they can deport us if we enter illegally without visas and without proper permission, if we break their laws. It is the same law that applies in Trinidad and Tobago. So Venezuelans, immediately on the Monday after, since last year, were required to have visas. You don't have a visa to enter Trinidad and Tobago, you cannot enter. Fast forward now to current time. Fast forward to March of this year, when the world began dealing with the pandemic that is COVID-19. We closed our borders. So the additional laws now that apply to Venezuelans, you need a visa to enter, and now our borders are closed to nationals and non-nationals, and you can only enter, even if you are national, but as non-nationals, so Venezuelan immigrants or other illegal immigrants, if you have the permission of the Minister of National Security. That is the current law. Add to that now the overarching law, which is the Immigration Act of Trinidad and Tobago, that has defined certain categories. And we're using that law. Illegal immigrants, persons who've entered illegally in breach of our domestic laws of Trinidad and Tobago, are subject to the Act. They're subject to the consequences of the Act. It may be detention orders, deportation orders, not landing persons. Additionally, as a further step, as the Minister of National Security during COVID, I also, utilizing the power under that Act, made a declaration that any illegal immigrant who enters Trinidad and Tobago is immediately an undesirable under the Immigration Act. So that's a further layer of protection, because then what that does, it allows immigration, if they pick up any illegal immigrant, and this is not focused, I want to make this very, very clear, this is not focused on any particular nationality. Any non-Trinidadian citizen, so a person who's not a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, who enters Trinidad and Tobago illegally under the current period in accordance with the law, I have declared them to immediately be an undesirable, and that has certain effects with respect to the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. I now want to move on. So you need from Venezuela, you need a visa initially. The borders are now closed, so you need permission. If you break our laws, you're declared an undesirable immediately upon entering the border. And then also our immigration laws have certain consequences that we will apply. We made that very clear even before the COVID pandemic and at the end of the registration process. To clarify, the UNHCR, a very important international organization and body, I met, along with the Attorney General and the then Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, with the UNHCR in Parliament in early 2019, when we began seeing an increase in the migration of persons into Trinidad and Tobago from Venezuela. And we made certain things very, very clear. A UNHCR registration does not give you immigration status in Trinidad and Tobago. Having a UNHCR certificate that you've registered with them does not give you landed status in Trinidad and Tobago. It is not a get out of jail card. We are having instances of persons, when being held by authorities, producing this card as though it was a get out of jail card. We said no, the registration process is what would give you status. That remains the law. So by just registering with the UNHCR, it does not provide you in domestic law in Trinidad and Tobago with any additional status. Yes, we will continue to treat everyone humanely and in accordance with international standards that are reasonable. But the treaties that were signed in the 60s were never made domestic law. There's also a concept in law called legitimate expectation. There's a Privy Council decision that deals with what happened with the whole CLICO fiasco, when promises were made by a government and then economic circumstances changed, that then deleted the whole concept of legitimate expectation. COVID-19 has done that to the world. So what may have been an expectation before, countries are now well within their rights to change their policies to protect their citizens, and that's what we did when we closed our borders on the 22nd of March of this year. So UNHCR registration does not give you immigration status. It does not override our domestic law. It does not give you immunity from the laws of Trinidad and Tobago or Trinidad and Tobago government's policy. When you're in Trinidad and Tobago, it is the government of Trinidad and Tobago that decides the policy of the day, not anybody external. We also made it clear at the time to UNHCR that even if an individual has a receipt or proof of registration, if they breach the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, we would deal with the individual in accordance with our laws. The UNHCR registration does not override or trump the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. This was all prior to COVID-19. I'd like to now remind everyone, there's a constant narrative, especially in the political arena, about porous borders in Trinidad and Tobago. Constantly we're being accused of porous borders in Trinidad and Tobago. At my last sitting in the House of Representatives, I had to answer a question with respect to the borders. What are we doing to shut the borders of Trinidad and Tobago? The government, through law enforcement, through the Coast Guard, the Defense Force, our intelligence services, and the police service, customs, immigration, are doing all that we can with our available resources to protect persons in Trinidad and Tobago and to keep those borders closed. When persons get through the borders and we pick them up, they are detained, they're not landed. The applicable law, they've come in without a visa, they've come in without permission from the minister, they've entered our borders without that. We are entitled to protect our citizens and the legal people in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is what we've been doing. We've been detaining people, we've been deporting people, we've been escorting people back across the borders. That is border protection. So you can't have it one way and then not the other. You can't say protect the borders, close the borders, but allow this one in, that one, not that one, not that one, choose that one. That is not how this government operates. There's one law for everyone. Two, there are very serious issues of human trafficking that are taking place currently. Human trafficking is not limited to men, to women, to boys, to girls. There's human trafficking of babies, of small children, of women. Three, this government will not allow persons to ignore the law of Trinidad and Tobago. Four, and this really struck me. You all would recall in August of this year, just a few months ago, when Trinidad went from sporadic, and we had weeks without any new positive COVID cases. We then went to cluster, and very quickly from cluster, we became community spread in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the underlying points and narratives being pushed continuously, did this come into Trinidad and Tobago via illegal immigrants? Did this come from persons coming from Venezuela? Quick, the blame was very quick to go in that direction. Oh, the government isn't protecting the borders are too porous, so we have allowed COVID to return to Trinidad and Tobago via illegal immigrants, despite at the time there being no scientific or health evidence of that. Because the persons who were turning up, testing positive, would not be illegal immigrants. Eventually, there were some Venezuelans. But cast your mind back to that period. I understand, we in the government understand the emotion and how persons can pull at heartstrings when dealing with children and dealing with women. I want to touch now on human trafficking, because I think it's time that we enter that conversation here in Trinidad and Tobago and let the public know what is going on. We have been targeting human trafficking at national security, this is the law enforcement intelligence services, for some time now. There are persons in Trinidad and Tobago engaged in human trafficking. I have had disturbing incidents where we suspect persons in law enforcement are involved in human trafficking. Anecdotally, how is it that persons who are coming in, you don't know they're coming in, arrive here illegally, come off a boat, picked up, taken straight into custody? Who is it that gets their names? Who is it that suddenly knows all of the people who are on that boat, knows their passport numbers allegedly, knows their ages, who they're related to, and all of a sudden an attorney arrives with that information? Think about it. They're entering illegally, no visa, so they're not in our system, no permission, no authority, no approval by national security to enter. They land, they're picked up on a beach, they're taken into custody. All of a sudden, a few hours later, someone turns up with a list of all of the names. And of course, no identification sometimes on the people. So they could say, I am Stuart Young. I'm here for Stuart Young. How do they know who is Stuart Young? And this is a very serious thing. There are instances, and serious instances, of human trafficking. Isn't that one possibility? That the persons who are engaged in human trafficking have prepared these lists, have prepared the story, have prepared the narrative, have the ability to then either anonymously tell attorneys or sometimes even retain attorneys on behalf of people. We've been observing this development. All of a sudden, before people even reach the beach, there's a list of names, not ever in the possession of those who are legitimate and in authority and upholding the law. We have serious questions about that. How are lawyers getting instructions in those instances? Who is providing the information and the detail? These persons are in state custody and don't speak English. Who is providing the instructions to the lawyers? These are questions that need to be answered. There are human trafficking rings in Trinidad and Tobago. We have been going after a few of them. You all have seen over time, over the past year or so, certain busts going down, certain people being held and charged. I want the population to also understand this. We currently have young migrant girls under the age of 18 in state protective custody as witnesses in these human trafficking rings. Understand, when you see human trafficking going on across the world, very often children and women are the victims. Is this what is currently going on? And is the system being used to facilitate the human trafficking? Because now let me tell you all what has been happening. Applications are being made. Before I go there, the state has built facilities. We're in a COVID pandemic. We built out quarantine facilities because we were concerned persons coming in, that we move them immediately into quarantine when we hold them. Those quarantine facilities we've spent serious resources on. We've actually gotten donations as well from the United States government for those facilities. So anyone who's suggesting that those are inhumane facilities, and that's been suggested now in the courts, that these are not facilities suitable. I have visited these facilities at the heliport. They are very suitable facilities. We are not putting people in inhumane or risky situations. We have had meetings with the government of Venezuela. Understand also, in this process, there needs to be a verification and an authentication. Anyone can produce a document and claim, I am Darren Bahau. I am this one, I am that one. I am Urvashi Tiwari. Until you can authenticate that with the authorities in that country, how do you really know who these people are? My understanding is, right now, The courts are not even interested in allowing the state to go through that verification process. That is very dangerous. That could in itself facilitate human trafficking. All of a sudden, there's this upsurge in habeas corpus applications. I'm a qualified attorney at law. A habeas application is when you have a concern about a person and that they may be being held illegally or illegitimately and not being charged. So very often in law, common law, they recognize 48 hours as a period for police to hold someone, and if they're not charged in that period, they should either be charged or they should be released. If they're not, you can go to court and ask a habeas corpus, produce the body to the court, and the court will then determine. The police will say, well, we're not charging them, they're released. Using habeas corpus applications in these instances is very dangerous. There's been no verification of who the people are. They've also been legally held. All of these people are being legally held by the state of Trinidad and Tobago to protect the population in a pandemic. You have the quarantine orders that even our citizens returning have to quarantine. And then also we have detention orders and then deportation orders in accordance with the law of Trinidad and Tobago. The Ministry of National Security and Immigration are following it to the T. We have received senior counsel advice. We are following it. We've built out the proper procedures. All of a sudden now, names are appearing, suggestions as to ages, etc. None of that verified. I also want to point this out, and this is an important point. Persons who are here legally, who may be the recipients of the Venezuelan migrant registration process, are not above the law. They cannot then determine, well, I'm calling for X, Y, and Z over in Venezuela, no visa to come in, break the border because it's illegal to come in without approval, enter Trinidad and Tobago because I call for you. That's what you're hearing now. I'm putting it down here today. We are going to start investigations, and anyone who has a Venezuelan migration registration card that is engaged in that, you are aiding and abetting in the breach of law of Trinidad and Tobago, and you're committing a criminal act. Your registration will be revoked and you will be deported. This has nothing to do with humanitarian circumstances. You are encouraging people to breach the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and we as a government cannot sit back and allow that to happen because we're trying to protect our population, and population means all persons in Trinidad and Tobago who are here legally. So as has been happening, we have also had instances when we find people on these boats going to and from with their Venezuelan registration cards. No visa to go and come, no approval to go and come across the border, but their registration card. I have revoked those registration cards and I have issued deportation orders, and many of them have been deported, and I will continue to do so. And this is not a breach of any law. It is being done fully in compliance with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. All that I've said above has been necessary acts to protect the population in Trinidad and Tobago. It is very, very dangerous, especially in the time of a pandemic, for persons to ignore the law. It is the government that decides policy. It is the parliament that then legislates it. It is up to a court to interpret and apply the law. The law, not the policy that it wants, and not anything else like that. There is becoming a disturbing trend of the ignoring of the government's policy on border protection and closed borders. And the government cannot sit back and allow that to happen. I was very disturbed recently. I was summoned to court a few nights ago. And in that, I heard a specific lawyer and making comments. There are persons at sea, they're in the high seas, they're here, they're there. And I was asking myself, how is it possible that you know where persons are? If you know it's an illegal act to break the borders and to come across the border without permission, no visa, and in a time of COVID, how is it that you seem to know where persons are and the authorities don't know where people are? And all of a sudden this narrative feeding up. And all of a sudden people outcrying But those are the same persons who will be the first to say, if we have an upsurge in COVID and we move into community spread in a massive way, did it come from Venezuelans? Members of the media, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, the government will continue to apply the law of Trinidad and Tobago. We will change policies as we need to, with the governing principle being to protect the population of Trinidad and Tobago. We cannot sit back and allow persons to breach the laws of Trinidad and Tobago and have no regard for it whatsoever. Whoever you are, persons who are breaking the law of Trinidad and Tobago, including those who may have the Venezuelan migrant registration cards, they will be dealt with in accordance with the law. The human traffickers out there, that's a big point I want to take away from here today. Understand all that you may be seeing, all of the narrative you may be hearing, may very well be the facilitation of serious human trafficking rings taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. Because everyone outside there knows what the laws are. And for politicians outside who are not Trinidad and Tobago politicians to be making, I heard it being said on the television this morning, that certain politicians, it's an allegation, because I didn't see it myself, nor did we receive any diplomatic note to that effect, return them from Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago. They're Venezuelan citizens. They have a right to be in Venezuela. No other politician can direct that they're taken into Trinidad and Tobago in complete breach and non-compliance of our laws. So that is the main issue that I asked you all to come here this afternoon for, to address this and to just let the population know that as a government we will continue to do what is necessary in accordance with the laws. Nothing I have said here is outside of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Nothing that the Ministry of National Security through the immigration or other arms has done has been in breach of the laws. Persons who are attempting to break the law, to breach the law, to change the law through emotions, etc., unfortunately we can't accept that, because that eventually leads to complete breakdown. The situations that we're holding persons in may not always be ideal, but we will always do the best we can, and we will continue the exercises that we've been engaged in. That's the main issue that I asked you all to come here today to deal with. I'll take some questions now at this stage.
Minister Young, Joshua Simongo from Guardian Media. Minister Young, out of the group of 16 children who were deported over the weekend, were any of the children deported without their parents?
You see, even now, Joshua, I have not seen any evidence of that. So what we have is persons alleging there's 16 children and this one with or without a parent. I've seen that report. I asked in court, tell me who these individuals are. I could not be told. So I have a problem with that. The only way you can authenticate that and know for certain is with an authentic document. So a birth certificate, say Joshua Simongo, the right stamps, and when you have these types of things, they have to be authenticated. So I can't answer that question.
But Minister, who would have signed off on the deportation? Would it have been you or someone else?
What happened there, my understanding of what happened there, is that they were re-escorted across the borders. All right, so that has been happening. For example, when we're out at sea, or we pick up something on the coastal radar and we intercept, we're not going to land persons, we're not going to bring them in, we just re-escort them. I have been signing scores of deportation orders. With that particular incident, I was not aware of it until I was asked to attend court that night, and even then, I was not allowed to ask questions as to what is all of this. So right now, for me, a lot of that is speculation, and I'm seeing the speculation, I'm seeing the suggestions, but the authorities have told me there's nothing of that instance. What you had is the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service who had picked up persons. They were then handed over to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard then escorted them back across the border.
A reporter from Guardian Media spoke to one of the mothers. She claims that her 11-year-old daughter was part of the group that was deported back to Venezuela, and she's looking for information because she claims she doesn't know where her daughter is. Can you at least provide information as to where they were taken?
Well, the answer is I can't. But furthermore, what you've just identified is a person who's breaching the law of Trinidad and Tobago. So you're telling me about a mother who's claiming her daughter came across on a boat not in her care or custody. I haven't heard about the father's care or custody or anything like that, breaching the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. They were then escorted back across the border as far as I am aware. I wasn't personally there, but that's what I've been told as a minister. And now I'm being asked what has happened with her. Where is the responsibility of that mother? Is that a situation you should put your child into? That's not for me to judge. What I can say is you are encouraging the breach of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. You're here on the humanitarian aspect of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago welcoming you to abide by our laws. If you go to the United States and it's against the law to drink and drive, or against the law to drink if you're under the age of 21 and you're 18, what will you tell them? In Trinidad I could drink because I'm 18? No, you abide by the laws of the country that you're in. And that's one of the messages here today.
Mr. Minister, one last question. To your knowledge, have any Venezuelan migrant children been deported without their children in the past?
Without their parents?
Yeah,
I can't answer that question. That is not something we'll encourage. But it leads to this question. How do children end up here? Assuming what you've said is true, and there are instances of that. How do these children end up here without their parents? That is a typical red flag of human trafficking. Typical red flag. Understand there's active human trafficking going on here in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is something we're combating.
Minister, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Darren from Newsday. I want to touch on the issue of human trafficking and the involvement of police officers and law enforcement, and possibly whether or not there's any evidence of politicians also involved in human trafficking. Now, human trafficking did not occur in the last year.
No.
Since the days of Elephant Walk back in the 80s, a police officer was harboring Venezuelans in a Mayaro brothel. And for over the years, a number of Venezuelan nationals and other nationals from different countries would have come into Trinidad, sold as sex slaves, sold as domestic servants, and so forth. What is the extent of law enforcement involved in human trafficking? And how many of them have been identified, prosecuted, or under surveillance in terms of removing them from the apparatus of national security to prevent such a reoccurrence?
I think you're right that this isn't a new occurrence, but I think certainly within recent times it appears to be occurring more and more. I know of a few instances, and you all would have actually reported some of them. So for example, a raid was done probably over a year ago. My recollection is in the Four Roads area, and I think there were a couple of police officers that were held in that, a SRP. There have been police officers who have been picked up in some of these raids and have been charged. There are a number of operations currently underway where we've been gathering intelligence, converting that into evidence to try and tackle these scourges. Personally, for me, what I keep asking is when we do these things, I want to see the faces, and I'm going to make the plea now to the media. Rather than put the women who may be the victims of human trafficking as the front of the newspapers and the top of the news, show the faces of the men. There's a demand and supply, right? So show the faces of the persons who are using these women and put them up and name and shame them. What I do know is the Commissioner of Police has been trying. He's identified certain divisions. He said that he's asked for persons to be polygraphed, etc. I don't think it's limited alone to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. There may be certain other elements in there. I've heard it suggested immigration officers. Sometimes you've heard it suggested other personnel as well. I don't have that particular information, but I do know that we have a number of operations ongoing, and I don't want to say much more than that at this stage, to target some of these human trafficking rings. You'll recall that there were a number of busts within the past 2 years. The Commissioner led a few of them where certain persons were charged coming out of it.
Going back to that same question, there are mechanisms in the police service, the defense force, I suppose under the public service regulations, to remove an officer suspected of wrongdoing from the area of concern where he would get information which can assist him in his criminal enterprise. But therefore, that is the question I'm trying to find out. Yes, there are people under surveillance. Yes, there are about a handful of officers before the court on human trafficking charges. But from what you are saying, it seems to be far more prevalent than what is already in the public domain. And you are asking the public to basically assist the government and the police service in ridding of this cancer?
Understand that I'm saying yes, human trafficking. You're pulling it into the realm of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and I am not focused on that. Let them, no one is above the law. So whoever is involved, I hope they're prosecuted for it. I am saying there are elements outside of the police service. That's who they're targeting. If there are persons in the police service, in the Coast Guard, in the Defense Force, in immigration, in customs, politicians, whoever is caught in that web, I hope they face their day of criminal charges and they're put in the court. I don't have that level of information. I did see it suggested that there were certain persons who may be involved in that human trafficking. Hopefully one day they will be brought before the courts for it. But with respect to the police service regulations, under the Constitution, I can't remember if it's section 123 now A, the Commissioner of Police is fully in charge of the administration and the financial circumstances of the police service, and this commissioner has been moving and transferring officers and that sort of thing. Once officers are charged, he can suspend them, he can remove them. We've recently amended the law to allow the same thing in the Defense Force, but they requires the catalyst is they have to be a criminal charge. So when a member of the Defense Force is criminally charged, they can then be suspended and removed from the service.
I'm happy you brought up that topic, because a couple of weeks ago the National Security Council would have met to discuss the ramifications of the pyramid scheme operated by DSS. And the head of the National Security Council described it as a cancer, if left unchecked, can eat the soul of the nation, with pretty strong words. Since then, we have not seen such widespread transferring of officers, apart from the 14 officers who would have been transferred and some suspended by the police. There's been basically a wall of silence on the Defense Force. Nobody knows that the $22 million is now stashed. The officer who alleged to have stuffed his envelope in his crotch, he claims that that was his money. He's still an officer serving. What is really going on with law enforcement and national security in this country?
Okay, first of all, with respect particularly to the DSS scheme, there are very active investigations going on with respect to that. I expect that we will see certain things take place very soon. I'm not going to be drawn into that any further because it's an active police investigation. Again, you're coming back to the point of law enforcement involvement. No one is above the law. That's my position. And those who are charged with the responsibility of investigating persons who are involved in corruption, I hope they're doing so. They certainly will be provided with the resources by this government when they request those resources. And I hope to see them one day charged and in court.
Good afternoon, Minister.
Afternoon,
from TV6. At yesterday's hearing, I don't recollect state attorneys disputing that 16 children were aboard the vessels for deportation along with 3 adults. Attorneys told the court at 1:30 yesterday that they were already in Venezuela. Now, we have the UNHCR. I reached out to them to confirm if they had any word on these children's status. And
if they had any
word on the location of the children. Up to noon today, I got no response. And then we saw Juan Guaido. He tweeted earlier today, Donde están los 16? He's asking where are they. The question about their well-being and where they are still remains. Can you give any guarantee that they have safely returned?
I can't even give a guarantee as to who was on what vessel, where, any time like that. I was not there. I don't know anything more than what I've seen and I've read and been told. It is not for state attorneys to dispute because it is the persons coming. There's a principle in law. He who alleges must prove. So it's the persons coming to court to say there are this number of persons. Immigration wasn't involved in that process. My involvement on Sunday night, we managed to determine that immigration had no, so we have no record in immigration of any persons. I can't give any guarantee of anything. I can't give any assurance of anything. What I can say is as a human being, I'm always concerned that every human being is in a safe environment. I didn't put anyone on a boat. I didn't put anyone on a boat to leave wherever they came from. We're assuming they came from Venezuela to come here. And then if they were returned, anything like that. So I am equally concerned. But my job, and I took an oath to this country is to protect and serve this country, to serve without fear, favor, malice, or ill will. And that's what I'm determined to do. And part of that, as the Minister of National Security, is to uphold the law. The laws of Trinidad and Tobago are clear, and what I have said here this afternoon cannot be contradicted. It is the law, and that is what we're about and what we're doing. I don't know what Mr. Guaido said or didn't say, and asking where the 16 are. I don't know if it's 14, if it's 10, if it's 22. All right, it's only what we see reported.
But don't you think, given that we're hearing that these persons came into the TTPS's custody, then went into the Coast Guard's custody, and then were put back on this vessel? We're told that some children are as young as 5, so that's visible. I could look at him and determine that he or she is a child. That we can say that they came into state's care.
Mm-hmm.
And Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So regardless of where the child comes from, how they got here, at some point Trinidad and Tobago would have had a responsibility for that child.
And Trinidad and Tobago, I assume, did what they were supposed to do in accordance with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and the persons were returned to Venezuela. That is what I have been told, and I'm going along with that. Don't miss the message that if you allow these types of instances to go, what the criminal elements out there will do. And they come in all forms. They don't walk around looking like criminals. I mean, how does a criminal look? So you may very well have persons who are encouraging that. This is to test the waters. This is to see, do I now put a boatload of 20 children, send them across the Trinidad, and because they're children, Trinidad would accept them. And let me tell you what's happening. An application is then almost immediately made to court of these 20 children and their names, no proof or no documentation being shown as to who their parents are, who these children are, etc., or what is being produced, no ability for the state of Trinidad and Tobago government for us to then authenticate it, ask the Venezuelan authorities, etc., and they're released. They're released to your custody, your custody, your custody, because you turn up and claim to be the parent. No verification exercise. I have a serious problem with that, because that can be the facilitation of human trafficking. Because what should be happening in law may not be happening. To just order that children be released to people who are claiming to be their parents, it doesn't work that way. I have received reports as the Minister of National Security, when I'm signing deportation orders, of certain individuals turning up in police stations, because very often when you hold the victims of human trafficking, they have no identification on them. They don't have a passport, they don't have their cards, their registration cards, or their Venezuelan identification card. All of a sudden, John Doe turns up. Here, look, I have Joshua's card, I have Urvashi's card, and that type of thing. Those are red flags. All right, so I am not here to speculate. I never get into the realm of speculation. I have a concern about all children, regardless of their nationality. But it doesn't mean you can breach the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and we should not fall into the trap of facilitating potential human trafficking. We are here to uphold our laws, and it is wrong, it is immoral, and it is illegal if you're putting minors on boats and just sending them across into a realm of illegality.
But then, Minister, we did the same thing if we did not verify their identities with the Venezuelan authorities. Suppose we
wouldn't even allow that opportunity, is what I'm being told. You're not even being allowed that opportunity, because somebody is turning up and claiming to be. You claim, who is it that claimed they spoke to a parent? You said a Guardian reporter spoke to a mother. What verification you had that was in fact the mother? I'm not getting into anecdotal and the realm of speculation. It's a very grey area.
So before we deport them, doesn't immigration try to contact, or doesn't the Ministry of National Security have an agreement with the Venezuelan government that we could share information? Are you missing 16 children? Or
the Venezuelan authorities may not even know that. But what I'm saying is the exercise that happened, there are different methodologies under the Immigration Act. A deportation is something different to when you're not landed and you're then told we escort. So if you fly into the United States and you don't have a visa, or for some reason Customs and Border Patrol say, no, we're not allowing you entry, you're not being deported back to Trinidad. You're just being returned back to Trinidad and this type of thing.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify something. When I asked about the children and the others who came in earlier, you said they were redirected immediately. Did you say that?
No, I didn't say that.
So they did.
Which what you say alleged 16?
Yeah,
no, I mean I said it. I said that they were in police custody. And then what I understand is they were handed over to the Coast Guard, and then they were escorted back across into Venezuela.
So,
Venezuelan
but isn't
waters.
it standard process that sometime during that period, before they're deported, someone has to sign off on the deportation? Or is
Well,
it,
I've just explained, Joshua. I've just explained that they're not all deportations. So when persons are, I don't know the process that happened there, and I'm not going to speculate. There are instances when persons are brought in, you may then take their information and then they're returned back. That may not include a deportation, but I'm not sure what happened in that instance. So I don't want to speculate.
but is that process itself a legal process outside of deportation? If it's just sign off
Yes,
on
because
something-
what I've just said is I have declared as the Minister of National Security, any person entering Trinidad and Tobago illegally is an undesirable. Under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, you can return. There are different ways. I am not an immigration officer, so I'm not familiar with every single instance. You can return, you can not land people, you can deportation is where I come in. Persons can be detained pending deportation. That's where I may come in, because I sign the deportation orders as the Minister of National Security. But there are other instances where it may not come to that.
I mean,
Understand at the end of the day what we're trying to do is protect the borders of Trinidad and Tobago, you know. Because the media would be the same ones to rightly highlight that, look, you have instances of people breaching the borders, people running on the beach, people entering Trinidad and Tobago. What is being done about that? How do you know illegal arms, contraband, narcotics, wild animals, etc. not being? So, I mean, it is a constant push and a constant fight, and we must just abide by the law.
Minister, while I understand that, some would say morality trumps legality. Some would say that if people are making claims that there were children on board,
I don't have that luxury.
It's duty to investigate whether those children return safely.
I don't have that luxury, and you know, it's easy to say it is the country's duty. When you reach a border, it's the same thing like the other day with the Nabarima. Go and fix the vest. Go and there's a border. You could, as a state, you can't go and enter another state's border without their permission and this type of thing. So it's the same thing. That is why we constantly have to be in communication with Venezuelan authorities.
But do you plan to get in contact with the Venezuelan authorities over this particular matter, this particular instance, or alleged?
But what is there to get in contact with them about?
To find out if the children arrive safely back to Venezuela, the alleged name, or they still?
I am sure that is being done.
Okay, thank you.
So, Minister, I want to just go back to that court matter that you went to court for, right? If there's a matter that is engaged in the High Court, and you as the Minister of National Security is aware of it, why would there be elements of national security acting to return nationals who are subject to a court matter?
Oh, hold on. Don't get pulled down the road of misinformation. My understanding, and the matter was dismissed yesterday for the following reason. The persons were returned before the matter was heard in court. The persons were returned to Venezuela before any court order was made. So there is no longer any jurisdiction. So there was no breach. There was no misinforming the court or anything like that. When the facts finally came out, the persons were returned to the waters or whatever it is outside of Trinidad and Tobago before there was any court hearing.
Okay, I'd like to just bring your memory back to the Glenn Ashby matter. Glenn Ashby was executed by the state while his matter was pending before the Privy Council. You recall that, right?
The matter was pending before the Privy Council. So there was a High Court hearing, there was a Court of Appeal hearing, so everybody was seized of the facts. This is before there was any court hearing, before the first court hearing. There's no analogy there whatsoever.
Are you aware that some of the same nationals who were sent back landed at Lucero a couple hours ago?
How would I be aware of that? What same nationals of where?
The same of the 16 nationals who were sent back, they returned to Trinidad via Peru,
So
landed
you were aware of this?
It's on our media page, sir.
No, but okay, but no, I am not aware.
So what is the process now that if the lawyer for those very nationals return to court to seek...
Are they in state custody?
No, they are not.
All right. Have they breached the law though?
According to US, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to just Sorry, colleagues. What is the number of nationals, Venezuelan nationals, are currently in custody at the heliport in Chagaramas? And how many of them, and why did the same process which took place on Saturday did not occur for them? Why they just couldn't be returned, as you said, without being landed and recorded and all those things?
I don't know the exact number, and I don't have the answer to that question.
And the number of nationals coming to this country from Venezuela, are they particularly from Tucupita, Pedernales, and Guerrilla?
Again, I don't have that information.
Minister, you clearly would be in some sort of dialogue with the Venezuelan authorities, and as the Prime Minister would have said back in March, I believe, when Ms. Delcy Rodriguez would have come with a contingent, some of the issues that you would have discussed there was COVID measures. In those discussions, was the issue of immigrants coming to Trinidad, did that come up, and how is the Guardia Nacional and Venezuelan authorities helping to restrict the movement of Venezuelan nationals to Trinidad and Tobago?
All right. Not too long ago, I think it was probably about 2 or 3 months ago, I headed a Trinidad and Tobago delegation with a virtual meeting with my equivalent in Venezuela. I think they call him the Minister of Interior Security or something like that. The equivalent of national security, along with a number of admirals and a number of different persons in their national security. We had our Chief of Defense Staff and other officers with us, and that was the beginning of that conversation. We also had our Chief Immigration Officer to try and communicate more and to work together to see how we can attack these human trafficking rings and the flow of illegal immigrants.
Mr. Good afternoon, Private Harry, ACP News. Out of the 7,600 people who have returned, who you gave permission to return to Trinidad and Tobago, have any of them been from Venezuela? And what are the reasons they sought the permission to enter Trinidad?
Sorry, what was?
Out of the people who would have to seek permission to come to Trinidad and Tobago, who are foreigners, were there any from Venezuela?
There may have been some Venezuelans, but they would have fallen into the category, for example, because I do have a recollection of some. One recently, I think Carib Glassworks asked for a Venezuelan to be granted permission to enter because they're doing some work at their glassworks manufacturing, and it was for blue bottles or something like that. So it would be that category. So far, it would always be some sort of professional service and a request from manufacturing or oil and gas. There was also a request by, I think, a subcontractor for Perenco of certain, I think it was 2 Venezuelans at the time who have a specialty that Perenco needed.
So if a parent who is registered here applies for his child to come back to Trinidad and Tobago, would you see that favorably? And allow
that has to go through a whole process before ending up by me. I am always going on what are the recommendations of immigration.
I just wanted to touch on the situation in prisons. What is the latest there? Some prisons have complained that since COVID has started, they have received their meals, all of their meals late, that their mass is of an inferior quality, and that there is not enough social distance in the prison. So I don't know if there's anything you can shed some light on that.
I think there's actually active litigation with respect to that. I mean, let's be real. Huh? I am not going to beat around the bush or bury my head in the sand or avoid the question. You can't have social distancing in a prison. There's no prison in the world. Maybe in some Scandinavian country, I remember reading a few months ago that they closed prisons in some Scandinavian country because they didn't have inmates. Maybe in an instance like that, but you can't have social distancing. What I did see is Dr. Hines say, and I was glad to see it, that from day one, we at National Security, and in particular prisons, have been working with the Ministry of Health. We have put in place all of their recommendations, and we continue to do so. As the Minister of National Security, I am very concerned about the prison officers and the inmates in prison. We built out a parallel system. We even built out a system where a new prisoner, so someone who's arrested and charged and now has to enter the prison system, was not brought directly to Golden Grove, to maximum security. We built out a parallel system of quarantine for them. We've built out other facilities if you test positive. So we're doing the best we can, and we will continue to do so. Well, I mean, I don't have information with respect to that. And I do know what had happened is some of the prisoners who prepared the meals, I think one of them had tested positive, so we moved the prisoners away from the preparation of meals and we were using prison officers to prepare the meals. Understand we're not in normal times. Understand there is going to be some level of inconvenience, and it's not limited to the prisons alone. It's all of us. We have to change how we're behaving and what is going on. Okay?
Minister, just staying with the prisons, one more question. We saw that there was a dispute in figures, or a dispute on the whole. The Prison Officers Association has said that as far as they are aware, no prisoner had been released under the minor offences regulation, so to speak. And the Attorney General said that prisons have been released. Can you add any clarity to this?
You'll direct that to the Attorney General, who is in charge of the legal matters.
Okay, the Prison Officers Association also called for the release of another category of prisoners, those facing life sentences. They called for the...
Thanks for that question. Let me address that.
Yeah.
I have recently, two separate categories, right? So I've recently had a conversation with the Director of Public Prosecutions to see if there can be an easier process or quicker process with respect to the non-violent offenders, and that's something we're going to explore. The Mercy Committee. Let me try and explain to the population once and for all with respect to the Mercy Committee. There's a recent Privy Council decision that has now complicated the Mercy Committee procedure. They've now said you have to let the applicant to the Mercy Committee be part of the hearing. If they want to be heard, you have to present them with all the documents you're going to consider. That has complicated the whole process and is now akin to a whole hearing and a tribunal. Let me tell the population how it has changed things. We had a Mercy Committee. I chaired the Mercy Committee. We had a Mercy Committee hearing. We actually decided 8 of the applications before us should be released when we considered everything, 8 of them, and then to be told, well, hold on, there's this Privy Council decision. They weren't given the opportunity to be heard. They weren't. And you know what was my response? I said, you are telling me that any one of those 8 would protest at the fact that the Mercy Committee has just released them because they didn't have an opportunity to be heard? That is how ridiculous sometimes the law is. And we will continue to do our work. In fact, I'm trying to find a easier way, but now because of COVID as well, how are you going to take the prisoners out, bring them into a room, and some of the persons on the Mercy Committee are not so young of age, and all these types of things, that every time you move persons, there's a risk of COVID. So I'm exploring, can we do it virtually, because I want to be able to get on with that work. And those who should be released, let us get. I have no interest whatsoever in those who are deserving to be released in holding that process back. All right, last question, please.
I don't know if you have this number on offhand, but do you have a number for the estimated number of nationals that have returned to the country since during the lockdown, since the borders have been closed?
I just gave that. The 7, just give me. Sorry, is okay. This is today is this is exemptions as at the 23rd, 7,443.
That's exemptions.
Exemptions, yeah.
You don't have a figure.
I don't have the breakdown there. Okay, thank you all very much.
That was a live broadcast of a press conference hosted by the Minister of National Security, Stuart Young. Remember to join us on TTT, Talk City 91.1 FM, and TTT Live Online for all your latest updates. I'm DK Rasta. Bye for now.